Good morning. It is Saturday, April the 4th. I'm Velshi. The search continues for one American crew member after a U.S. F-15 fighter jet was shot down by Iranian forces over Iran yesterday. You are looking at debris from the crash. The jet was carrying two crew members. The military was able to rescue one of the two crew members. A U.S. official tells MS Now that a second American jet, this one is an A-10, it's called a Warthog, is believed to have been shot down by Iranian forces near the Strait of Hormuz. The lone pilot of that aircraft was rescued. Additionally, at least one Black Hawk helicopter was fired on, and several of its crew members have been injured while they were searching for the missing American service member from the downed F-15 jet. So there is one pilot unaccounted for right now from that F-15 jet. We do not know what his condition is, whether it's a he or a she. We don't know where they are. The Iranians have not claimed that they have got custody of this person. There is a search operation underway. We'll stay on top of these developments. We're going to have live reporting from the region in just a few minutes. However, switching gears to a seismic shakeup here at Donald Trump's DOJ, the Trump mega loyalist and personal lawyer Pam Bondi is out as Attorney General. Now, you know the story, but there's a lot more to it. Some people are celebrating, pointing to her chaotic tenure that turned the Justice Department into Donald Trump's personal vendetta machine, which, of course, he promised during the campaign. But don't get too comfortable. Donald Trump's reported shortlist to replace Bondi doesn't suggest that either reform nor order is coming to the Justice Department. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You see, Bondi was all about fealty. But it seems that fealty itself is no longer enough in this second Trump administration. What Trump needs in an attorney general is a fixer. Blind fealty is simply the starting point now. The ceiling is how far you're actually willing to go. Bondi's downfall wasn't due to what one might expect. It wasn't really about incompetence. It was that she simply wasn't useful enough. Not because she broke with Trump, she didn't, or grew a spine, she didn't, or struggled with a sense of justice in an administration that always seems to be skirting the law, she wasn't. It's not even that she pushed back a little. It seems Pam Bondi's gone because she didn't go far enough in protecting Donald Trump. She didn't run enough interference. She didn't control enough damage. She didn't apparently cover for him enough. She didn't go hard enough against his perceived enemies. As the old saying goes, she did a poor job of burying the bodies. One might think this is about the Epstein files, which were central to her job since the day she was appointed. But an increasing number of sources suggest that while she blundered her way through that central scandal, which may still ultimately be the undoing of this administration, Pam Bondi's failure in Donald Trump's eyes was far more basic. Bondi simply couldn't deliver on persecuting and prosecuting Trump's perceived enemies. On one hand, Bondi had fueled expectations that she couldn't meet, publicly claiming on Fox News in February of last year that an Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on her desk, end quote, waiting to be reviewed, only to later entirely contradict herself. One might say lie if one were being creative, when she would say that no such list existed. Now, that credibility gap never closed. That wound never healed. It's what we call an unforced error, and it's a big one. But that lie or obfuscation or whatever it was, serious though it was not ultimately what cost her the job. Sources told MS Now that Bondi was fired because Trump grew dissatisfied with her inability to prosecute his perceived enemies, a list that includes the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, former FBI Director James Comey, Jerome Powell, whom Trump appointed as Fed chair, but who refused to cut interest rates on demand, the California Senator Adam Schiff, who prosecuted Trump during one of his impeachments, the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, the former Trump administration official, Chris Krebs, and Miles Taylor, the Minnesota Governor, Tim Walz, the Minneapolis Mayor, Jacob Frey, even former President Bill Clinton, and 6 members of Congress whose so-called crime of treason was recording a video informing members of the military and the intelligence community that they are not obligated to follow illegal orders. According to New York Times reporting, in the final weeks of her tenure, Bondi, aware that her days might be numbered, tried to win back favor by targeting individuals that Trump had singled out, including former Obama CIA Director John Brennan and former White House aide turned whistleblower Cassidy Hutchinson. But even that was not enough. And that says something important about what the role of the Attorney General has become. These aggressive, selective, vindictive, and legally dubious efforts were not being driven by traditional prosecutors. Indeed, they were being led by political henchmen who were willing to do the dirty work, combing through financial records, loan applications, insurance forms, and any other material they could use against specific targets. Take the campaign targeting New York Attorney General Letitia James, a longtime Trump target and adversary. James successfully sued the Trump Organization in 2022 for more than 200 instances of fraud spanning a decade. Behind the renewed efforts to nab James on possible mortgage fraud was this guy. We've talked about him a lot on this show, Bill Pulte. Pulte is a close Trump ally and federal housing official from the billionaire Pulte real estate family. We'll talk about that conflict another time. Pulte publicly inserted himself into the campaign against Tish James, digging into her mortgage loan applications, and after 3 failed attempts to prosecute her, he then filed 2 new criminal referrals. Unsurprisingly, Pulte was reportedly one of Bondi's biggest critics. According to the New York Times, quote, they believed he had long pushed for her firing, blaming department leadership for slow-walking and bungling the James and Comey cases, among other things, according to people familiar with the situation, end quote. That's the model they're building. Not building cases from evidence, but searching for and twisting evidence to fit the target. All of this is unfolding against a broader backdrop. On Friday, Donald Trump announced via Truth Social that Vice President J.D. Vance will serve as the nation's so-called fraud czar, overseeing a sweeping anti-fraud push with a mandate extending, his words, everywhere. But in Trump's words, quote, primarily in those blue states where crooked Democrat politicians have misused taxpayer funds. To be clear, this has its roots in Minnesota, where Trump has launched a blatantly racist attack against the sizable Somali community there. The administration has seized on fraud allegations to politicize the issue, using them as a pretext to target Democrat-led states. So J.D. Vance is going to chair a new White House anti-fraud task force, which will include a representative from the Justice Department, linking the White House and the Department of Justice in a way that raises questions about the DOJ's independence and the real aims of this initiative. This task force follows another DOJ unit announced earlier this year, which Trump claims will investigate fraud and will report directly to him and J.D. Vance. The administration presents these efforts as a crackdown on fraud, but the infrastructure being created is unusual and deeply troubling. As the Democratic Senator Chris Coons warns, quote, I am concerned that the administration is less concerned with specifically fighting fraud than with targeting people and states it dislikes or that it has a partisan agenda against, end quote. According to NPR, the DOJ unit will operate in close connection with the White House, even as existing anti-fraud, tax, and public integrity units have been either weakened or dismantled. Perry Carbone, a former federal prosecutor, explains, quote, the Justice Department has historically operated with meaningful independence from the White House in individual enforcement matters. When you have statements like we have here suggesting that any new fraud enforcement office would be answerable to the White House, that raises legitimate concerns. If the Justice Department wanted to increase fraud prosecutions, then they should be taking action to strengthen enforcement and not weakening it. The way that should be done is through the existing structure instead of cutting resources to the fraud section, end quote. And by the way, this fealty purge of Pam Bondi, or the effectiveness purge, it's not happening in a vacuum either. The admitted puppy killer who was acting as the Department of Homeland Security secretary was the first to go, and Trump is said to be considering broader cabinet changes. Politico reports that he's very angry with officials he believes have underperformed or drawn negative attention, signaling a potential major reset across the administration ahead of November's midterm elections that are looking increasingly ominous for this administration. Officials reportedly on thin ice include the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, the Labor Secretary, Lori Chavez de Raymer, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the aviation enthusiast, FBI Director Kash Patel. Meanwhile, Trump has reportedly floated the idea of replacing Bondi with Lee Zeldin, the current EPA administrator and one of Trump's most reliable foot soldiers, or the Fox News host and former prosecutor Jeanine Pirro, or the woefully inexperienced Trump defense lawyer, and there are a lot of them, by the way, so I'll have to name this one. This one's Alina Habba, or the former Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, who's a Christian nationalist who generally doesn't like immigrants, but he's fine with German immigrants since that's what his grandparents were. 340 million people in this country, 1.3 million licensed attorneys, and this is the short list we have. Taken together, this appears less like routine turnover and more like a recalibration around a single question: who is delivering for Trump? Bondi's ouster is just one part of the story. It signals a broader, more troubling shift in how the administration is structuring enforcement, oversight, and the rule of law in this country. Don't celebrate the firing of Pam Bondi. What and who comes next could mark a significant escalation from what we've already seen. For more on this, I'm joined by Mary McCord. She served as acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ and is now an MS Now legal analyst. Also joining me right here on set, George Conway, an attorney, founder of the Society of the Rule of Law. He helped co-found the Lincoln Project. He's currently a Democratic candidate in the congressional race for New York's 12th district. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being with us. I appreciate your time. Mary, let me just start with you. I think there's an important distinction people may be losing. Pam Bondi wasn't actually let go for some performance reason associated with being Attorney General. It wasn't that she was failing at her job as Attorney General. She just wasn't doing something enough, and that enough is not actually normally a job requirement of being the Attorney General.
Well, to the extent that this firing was because she wasn't able to deliver on the political retribution prosecutions that Donald Trump desires, that's much less a function of her and a function of a couple of things. One, you need evidence. You need facts that actually support a violation of law. And you've got to be able to show that to a grand jury to get an indictment. And we've seen that grand juries have repeatedly refused to indict, or even in the case of Lindsay Halligan and James Comey, when Letitia James and James Comey, when Lindsay Halligan was able to go into a grand jury and get an indictment, a judge has already sort of questioned her presentation and whether she left out key facts or maybe said things improper. And of course, a judge also dismissed those cases because she was improperly appointed. When others tried to then re-indict Tish James, it failed. So you need evidence, you need facts, and you need those to show there's a violation of law. And that's not going to change because somebody else is then in the position of the Attorney General. It's also not the Attorney General who goes into court and presents those cases. And so, I think this problem is one that if Donald Trump thinks he can fix it by putting a different position in that chair, he's wrong about that.
George, give me your take on this, because Mary makes a good point. You need evidence. They keep trying. Donald Trump is obsessed with going after these people he perceives as his enemies, most of whom are just doing their job, right? James Comey, Tish James, they were doing what they were doing. We're not looking at candidates. I mean, Jeanine Pirro at least has some experience as a prosecutor. That's it. Yeah. We're not looking at people who are otherwise better qualified to do their jobs. I'm not giving Pam Bondi more credit than she's due, but she was a lawyer and a prosecutor.
Right. And look, I mean, there are a bunch of problems going on here for people who want to work for the Trump administration. First of all, it's very, very difficult for starters to be evil enough and depraved enough and corrupt enough and grifting enough for Donald Trump. But here, the secondary problem was exactly what Mary pointed out, which is you actually need evidence. You can't just make these cases up. Right. I mean, you can't just fabricate evidence. I mean, maybe that's their next step. They'll try to do that. You just can't make cases up. You have to go into a court. You have to prove them. And not that even, these people were not all that competent, the Lindsay Halligans of the world. And Aunt Pam Bondi was actually a prosecutor, as you said. But no amount of competence combined with sufficient depravity can bring these prosecutions. They just don't work. But Donald Trump doesn't care about that because he's detached from reality. He's deranged. He's a narcissistic sociopath. And now we have a third thing going on, which is he's failing. Okay? He's floundering. He's screwed up this war. He's screwed up the economy. His poll numbers are dropping down to the low 30s, which
kind of where it gets stuck.
Which is where it gets stuck. It's hard to see him go any lower, but, I give him a chance. And so, as a narcissist, as a pathological narcissist, he can't take the blame. So he wants to start chopping away at the people around him. And, of course, he starts with the women because he's a misogynist and unceremoniously gets rid of them. But, there are plenty of corrupt male incompetence, and he's going to get around to them. So which raises the question, who would take these freaking jobs?
Right.
Why do people take these jobs? Why would you want to go? And Pam Bondi actually had a decent, okay reputation. She was a real prosecutor and a real DA. I don't think she was a rocket scientist, but she was respected in her own way. And now she's basically going to be remembered forever as being the worst attorney general in history, who destroyed, literally has gutted the Department of Justice. It's going to take years to fix.
They've literally lost lawyers. They've lost prosecutors.
Who's going to take the job?
Mary, let me ask you this, though, because I apologize in advance, because it's such a waste of your time and your expertise, given your experience. But to the extent that you need evidence, and that this administration has tried and failed numerous times to gain evidence in some of these prosecutions, how much of this is the process being the point? Does Donald Trump just want somebody who's going to be more of a bulldog, who scares more people? Because I don't know how this ends. I don't know why this is good for Donald Trump. To George's point, he's losing on the economy. He's losing on this war. He's losing popularity. What does going after Comey and Schiff and Tish James and all of these people actually do for him at this point?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because even if it were somehow successful and could get through a grand jury, it's probably never going to get through an actual jury trial. And like I said, you're going to have to come up with some evidence, and that's not going to change if it's Todd Blanche, who's now the acting AG. It's not going to change if it's Lee Zeldin or Jeanine Pirro. And, one of the things that, I think George is right that Donald Trump started with the women because he's a misogynist. Yep. But I also wonder sometimes if the way that Pam Bondi just supplicated herself to him almost was an embarrassment. Todd Blanche has a different style. Todd Blanche doesn't sit out there and preach every day that Donald Trump is the greatest president we've ever had in the history of America, the way Pam Bondi does. She's done it on Capitol Hill. She's done it in public speaking. Todd Blanche is just like the bulldog who just rams Trump's agenda. And I think part of it could be to George's misogynist points. And now I'm way outside of my lane as a lawyer and a former DOJ. I'm now doing, psychology, which is not my expertise. But, when I watch her, I wonder if sometimes that just didn't bother him. He wanted somebody who was just going to be a little bit more forceful. And even though he loves people to supplicate themselves to him, I think maybe it was somewhat off-putting, and maybe he thought that was part of the problem.
It's weird because, again, George, while everybody remembers the files are on my desk just waiting to be reviewed, I remember the testimony in which she was asked about prosecuting Epstein collaborators, and she talked about the Dow.
Yeah,
it's like, well, that was sort of stupid.
It was stupid, but I have an answer to. I mean, I'm happy to go into the psychological stuff with Donald Trump, as you know. I'll answer the question that Mary said. What does it do for him?
Yeah,
it gives him personal satisfaction to hurt his enemies. He will destroy himself if he can hurt them. Right. Which is the big danger for our country. This is what
Which is wild, because I think of him as a self-preservationist, but this doesn't look like self-preservation.
He'll take everyone. He wants
go down with the ship.
Correct. I mean, it's kind of like what happened in January 6th. That even Mitch McConnell recognizes he wanted to burn everything on the way out of town. Yeah. And that's the danger with a sick, deranged, malignant narcissist like a Donald Trump is they end up destroying not just themselves, but everyone around them. And the real question is whether Republicans are going to finally realize we have to get rid of him too.
Right.
And we have to help the Democrats get rid of him before he destroys us all.
Thanks to both of you. I appreciate you kicking us off this morning. Mary McCord is an MS Now legal analyst and professor at Georgetown Law. George Conway, founder of the Society of the Rule of Law and a Democratic candidate for Congress in New York. All right, coming up, the search continues for the missing American service member who was aboard the fighter jet that was shot down, the F-15 that was shot down by Iranian forces yesterday. The latest on the search and rescue is next. All right, moments ago, President Trump posted on Truth Social, remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out. 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them. Glory be to God, end quote. Glory be to God. This is a new ending. Normally he says, thank you for your attention to this matter. Glory be to God, which is a whole thing which we're going to discuss later about the role that God seems to be playing in this mission. But this all comes as U.S. forces continue the search and rescue mission for the missing airman that was shot down in an F-15 yesterday. Trump has not posted on social media at all about that situation. A crew member of an F-15 shot over Iran. There were 2 crew members in that airplane. One has been rescued. The other one is unaccounted for, and the President of the United States has not posted about that. But glory be to God for the next 48 hours. Iranian forces are also looking for that airman, by the way, and Iranian state media says that a local Iranian official has put a bounty out for their capture. Now, this incident is the first American combat aircraft to have been downed by Iranian forces since the start of the war 5 weeks ago. It's also believed to be the first downing of a U.S. fighter jet by enemy fire since the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003. During the U.S. search mission, at least one Black Hawk helicopter was fired upon. You can see low-flying aircraft there. Several of the crew members on the Black Hawk were injured. The helicopter, however, was safely able to return to base. The other crew member of the 2-seat F-15E fighter jet that was shot down has been rescued by U.S. forces. Separately, Iranian forces are also believed to have shot down a second American jet. This one is an A-10 Warthog. It crashed near the Strait of Hormuz, and the lone pilot of that aircraft has been rescued. Joining me now from Dubai is MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid. Inzamam, give me some sense of this. I would assume if the Iranians had this second airman, we'd know about that because they're very good at putting that sort of information out very fast. But we are missing information. We don't know where this airman is, what the condition of this airman is. What do you know?
Yeah, Ali, look, we haven't had information directly from the United States about this missing pilot, whether they have been rescued or not. It's been quite some time now since that F-15 jet was shot down by the Iranians. But I guess the good news also is that we haven't heard directly from the Iranians that they have captured this pilot. As you mentioned, they're usually quite good at making a bit of a sing and dance, particularly online, when they've done something in their eyes, which is pretty positive. They were the first ones to report that they'd shot down this F-15 plane yesterday. But clearly, at the minute, there is no news about this second pilot. And right now, there is a race on a search mission by both Washington and Tehran to find this pilot because, of course, the US wants to retrieve this armed forces officer in the Air Force to get them back to safety, to make sure that there is no harm done to them inside of Iran. But of course, on the other hand, you've got Iran who will want to try and capture them alive as well, because they will use them as some sort of propaganda tool. They'll use them in some form of negotiations in this conflict. And essentially, they would have severe upper hand in this conflict if they manage to get hold of this US pilot. And I think importantly as well, we see the efforts from Iran, because as you mentioned there, Iranian media have specifically called on the people of Iran to go out to these 2 provinces, which they've named, near to where the jet was shot down, and actively go out and look for this pilot, hand them in to authorities, and you'll receive a reward of around $60,000. So look, the news is right now that the US have not given us any official update. Iran themselves not updating their social media accounts where their leaders usually talk. And currently, the search very much continues for this US pilot. Ali.
Inzamam, we'll stay close to you on this. Thank you for joining us this morning. MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai. All right, coming up, the national average for a gallon of gas is now $4.10 a gallon, close to $6 a gallon in California. I don't need to tell you that, however. You already know the price of gas. You're feeling it at the pump, and you have Donald Trump's war in Iran to thank for that. Coming up next, everything you need to know about the sudden oil shock that's been felt around the world. It's been more than a month. It's been about 5 weeks since the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel plunged us into a war of choice with Iran. Americans have seen gasoline prices shoot up to a national average of $4.10 a gallon of self-serve unleaded gas. That's more than $1 more than it was a month ago. The culprit is Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the crucial naval passageway through which more than a fifth of the world's oil flows. Oil prices shot up even higher when Trump declared that the war could drag on for weeks longer during his address to the nation this week. For the first time ever, U.S. oil futures, well, maybe it's not the first time ever, but it's the first time in a long time, U.S. oil futures, which are called West Texas Intermediate, are now trading at a premium to the international oil benchmark, which is called Brent crude. These are for technical reasons having to do with when that oil actually gets delivered. So people are paying more for American crude oil because they can get access to it faster. West Texas Intermediary, that's American crude, the futures for that settled at $111.54 a barrel yesterday afternoon. Brent crude futures, that's the international benchmark, settled at $109.03. That's up 60% in just the last month. That's the biggest monthly gain since the 1980s. Now, remember, gas prices always, 100% of the time, track oil prices. So your $4.10 a gallon average price of gas is still going to go higher. Now, the president says these spikes are temporary because he's been trying to calm the markets. But right now, stock markets are not reassured by Trump's words, and the cost of energy and plastics and fertilizer and food and transport are going up everywhere. Joining me now is the veteran financial journalist Ron Insana. Ron's the author of the Substack column, The Message of the Markets, and he's the guy I've turned to for, 25 plus years when we need to explain big issues. My old friend, I just want to get to one thing. Unlike other things like tariffs, where a company may decide they're going to pass it on to the consumer, they may decide they can swallow it, whatever. That's never the case with oil. Oil prices always become gas prices.
Yeah, look, I was 12 years old during the Arab oil embargo in 1973. They were passed on immediately. Then again in 1979 during the Iranian Revolution. And through every spike that we've seen since then, prices at the pump go up immediately, and they go up faster than they come down, which is another issue we could deal with another day, Ali. But yeah, look, there's the direct linkage between the price of crude oil and the price of gasoline, and also a direct linkage between other heating oil and natural gas. All of these different energy products are linked to crude oil. And when there are supply shortages or disruptions or worries that we're having right now that this could extend for, even longer than we currently realize, prices are just going to continue to go up. And again, because they're holding onto this high cost inventory, the price will come down even more slowly than it went up. It goes up in an elevator and comes down in an escalator, right? So,
and you make an interesting point. Somebody said to me yesterday, well, at least I don't drive, so this doesn't affect me. That's just not true. It affects everybody. No. If you heat or air conditioning your home, if you buy food, if your food comes from a farm, if your food gets shipped anywhere, if you buy anything from Amazon or UPS, or the Postal Service now has a fuel surcharge. You pay twice. You pay at the pump. That's the price you think you pay. And then it's woven into everything because everything in this country gets transported.
Yeah, and you pay more than twice. I mean, petrochemicals are used in a wide variety of consumer goods. Plastics, as you mentioned earlier. Jet fuel has more than doubled, and so you're now starting to see airlines raise ticket prices and even put surcharges on baggage that's being put into the plane as you travel from one spot to another. So this has really wide-ranging implications for the economy. It's going to push inflation higher over the next couple of months than we would have expected just 6 or 8 weeks ago, and it's going to potentially keep the Federal Reserve from lowering interest rates because inflation, already above target prior to the war, is going to be even more so over the course of the next several months. And if this becomes a protracted, war, that means that inflation, as we've seen in prior periods, will remain elevated for some period.
But that's a problem. If you end up with slower growth, we saw some revisions to job numbers that are worrisome. We see the stock market. We're getting to a problem where these are two ways to fix these things, right? You lower interest rates to try and goose the economy, but you can't lower interest rates when prices are going up. This is a mathematically and economically dangerous place to be.
Yeah, we've been talking for months and months now about mini stagflation. Again, this isn't the 1970s where, a U.S. car gets 11 miles to the gallon. It gets close to 30. And again, we're not seeing the types of disruptions that we saw in the 70s with respect to stagflation. But we are seeing, as I just mentioned, above average inflation, above target, most certainly. We're starting, even though we did see a bounce in job creation last month, the job market is low, higher, low fire. So it's stagnant. And estimates of economic growth are beginning to come down towards 1%. So that's kind of a stagflationary environment that is satisfying to no one, and no less so to the Federal Reserve that, again, as you say, if it raises rates to kill inflation, you deepen the risk of recession. If you cut rates, you might add fuel to the fire of inflation. And so it's a box in which the Fed finds itself, and it's also a box in which consumers find themselves as well, particularly if they have to start making choices between what they pay for. Higher prices for gasoline, higher prices for food, childcare, insurance, so on and so forth. So it is a sticky wicket at this point in time and is entirely dependent now on the duration and severity of the war.
You and I are going to be talking a lot, Ron, which at least I enjoy talking to you. I hate that this is what we're talking about. Ron Insana is a longtime financial journalist and author of The Message of the Markets on Substack. All right, coming up, Pete Hegseth's latest controversy. I'll explain next.